name is Brianne H. Williams. I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of Oregon, and I work with individual adults of all seasons of adulthood and couples in my practice. The focus of my work is around the impact of grief, loss, trauma, and stress on all of us. And one of the main methods I use as a therapist is called internal family systems, or IFS. If you are not already familiar with what IFS is, I would recommend checking out a video I made a while ago called A Brief Introduction to Internal Family Systems, which explores some of those foundational concepts that might make this video or my other brief question answer videos make more sense. I always want to add the disclaimer that even though I am a therapist and I am talking about therapeutic concepts, this video is not intended to be therapy itself. I'm hoping to just inspire some curiosity out there, get some conversations going, and help people understand some of the potential benefits of doing this kind of work themselves. So the question I am working with today came from a real client who at the time was pretty new to therapy, and they were asking me why it seemed like I kept bringing up this concept of inner conflicts. So the question is like, why do inner conflicts matter? Why bring attention to them? What is the value in exploring inner conflicts? And so this video is by no means an exhaustive list of potential reasons for that, but I hope these 3 reasons, as well as some examples to go with them, can be helpful. Explaining what an inner conflict is. A part of me feels this way, a part of me feels that way. And maybe 10 different parts of me feel 10 different ways. So I like to really normalize, again, we all have inner conflicts about just all the things we experience. But the more severe an inner conflict is, or the less consciousness we have around the inner conflict, the more it tends to create some issues in our lives. So a common thing people come into therapy to explore is that they're behaving in some way in the outside world that they don't really understand why they're doing it. So a classic example is, let's say someone is struggling with angry outbursts and they know deep down that it's misdirected anger. So it's coming up suddenly. It, is kind of like the classic example of someone, let's say they have a really difficult job and maybe a boss or someone around them that's causing them a lot of hell at work. And so they bottle it all day, then they go home and their spouse, their children, like whoever they live with, says one thing to them and they blow up. And so they end up in therapy because they're getting feedback about the way they're impacting other people. Maybe they feel a lot of shame about it. And so I don't want to overgeneralize and say always, but often, very, very often, we can bet that there is an inner conflict upstream of that anger that has either been ignored, denied, repressed, unacknowledged in some way. And so I think this can be really helpful because the ultimate goal is to keep this person out of a shame and anger cycle, which is very common that for people who do notice that their nervous system goes to anger very quickly and maybe at people that do not warrant that kind of response. They will feel so ashamed about it afterward, then they'll bottle up that feeling, and then that just, it goes around and around, and I really feel for these people. So I think that really noticing what potential inner conflicts were going on before that feeling can just reduce some shame and air out what's happened. So let's say someone is trying very hard to put on a positive face, put a good spin on what's going on at their job, but maybe they are more resentful of some of like the company's practices than they realize, or they're working with someone at work who is, treating them in some way that's really activating that injustice center, that anger, but it doesn't feel like an appropriate place to show that anger at work, which is fair, but the lack of acknowledgement around how much it's impacting that person can be a really big part of the picture. And so again, that isn't advocating for someone to make a sudden decision about what to do next, but there is something about just bringing the awareness of like parts of me are way more worn down than I've maybe been acknowledging to myself. Like that there's something that can help us really understand, again, what's going on upstream. Why am I doing this thing that I don't really want to be doing? A protector part is hijacking me in this moment. And often it's because there is like a sort of inner conflict that hasn't been acknowledged. A second reason with an example would be that understanding things through an inner conflict lens can really help expand our perspective on a situation that can feel just emotionally very volatile or heavy, like in the case of betrayal. Let's say in a partnership there's been some infidelity, and so what will end up happening is that one partner who has been betrayed, as soon as they get the information about what has happened, often there's a deep inner polarization. Maybe not in every case, but a lot of time that person kind of splits into primary kind of two teams about how they are feeling toward the person who betrayed them. So they may have a part or parts who still depend on that person, who still love that person, who still need, again, some attachment things from that person, and they want to be near that person after a betrayal has happened. They're hurting. That's the person they often go to for comfort. And after a betrayal, that can be a really messed up thing, though, because then you also can get folks with this other team of protector parts that want to get out and are so hurt, never want to see that person again who betrayed them, maybe, who do not feel a sense of compassion for what just happened or what they learned just happened. And so that polarization, because when we see people who are really in the fallout of betrayal trauma, they are so carrying a heavy burden, and they can seem to others like kind of reactive or all over the place, confused, disoriented. And when we think about it through that inner polarization, that the person they just went to for comfort all those years is also now the person they never want to see again, it can make sense about like that person's having two opposing teams of parts likely chatting with them. So again, I don't want to say that's every single situation, but that's an example of seeing that kind of wound through the lens of an inner conflict. If we felt all one way or another, it might not be as stressful on our bodies and our minds. So again, just seeing stress arises out of the tension. And so that brings me to what I think is kind of the core and most important reason. Why is it worth our time and energy to explore inner conflicts? And I would say that it is my perspective, we mature and grow as people when we can learn to tolerate the tensions of these inner conflicts. This is where I believe internal family systems has some really cool overlap with like some of the other more psychodynamic theories in psychology that many people have probably seen or heard of this example of the visual of an iceberg, where there's what's above the water line is what we are conscious of, and what is below the water line is what we are being driven by but are not fully conscious of. And so I think inner conflicts can happen where one part is above the water line and one part is below the water line. And so we are increasing our awareness and we're growing, because usually stuff is shoved under the water line because it feels, at least in a moment to us, kind of intolerable to look at. So when we grow our tolerance to see these inner conflicts, we're lowering that water line and seeing more of the iceberg. So, like, I'll just give another common example that shows up in my practice a lot. Let's say there's adult children struggling to figure out how to relate to an aging parent. Maybe it's sort of a non-urgent situation. It's like everyday boundaries. How often do I visit? How often do I call them? Maybe the adult children experience their parents as not so fun to be around for a wide variety of reasons. And they also at the same time kind of feel that duty to show up in a certain way. And sometimes it's a caregiving situation. Maybe the aging parent is actually now or increasing in their need of what kind of care they are asking for. And the adult children might feel really conflicted about what their sort of role is in that situation. So I think inner conflict work can be really helpful because, again, we get into trouble when we deny part of our inner conflict. So let's say we've got a adult child with a strong sense of duty, a strong sense of responsibility. So they're showing up every day, they're doing all the caregiving, they're arranging appointments, they're maybe even doing hands-on care, who knows, like they're doing all that. And let's say to do that, they are repressing or holding back or not wanting to look at the fact that they are feeling huge amounts of like anger toward that person. Maybe that's uncomfortable for them to think about being angry at a sick or elderly person. Maybe they, again, are sacrificing other parts of their life that they could be spending, again, time and energy on, and there's some resentment growing. So there could be all kinds of, air quotes, negative feelings that, let's say, a person kind of dissociates from, puts under the water line in order to perform in the role that they want to. I am a huge advocate for the acknowledgement of the full picture. And maybe that person still makes a choice, like on the outside, to go do the exact same thing they had been doing before, showing up to all the appointments, doing the transportation, whatever the things are, but they can now make that choice to do so from a more conscious place. They are bringing their self energy, their wise mind, their intermediator, so to speak, to the scene, and they're hearing and caring for the parts that have been screaming, I don't want to do this anymore. And so again, it's not about letting those parts drive or letting any particular part drive our decisions. It's about finding that central self energy to show up around the inner conflict, because if we don't, symptoms are gonna arise elsewhere. Internal systems have an amazing intelligence at self-balancing. So if we are ignoring, like just to use the caregiver example, if we're ignoring the parts that are just screaming, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be doing this, maybe another part is going to be coming in and, again, using drugs or alcohol heavily after leaving that situation, or coping in some other way that is not really serving that person in the long term. So just, again, the acknowledgement alone can help us make conscious choices that may very well just end up looking the same on the outside, but they're going to feel different to that person on the inside. So I hope that's a good introduction to why, if you're working with me as a therapist, I'm going to be exploring inner conflicts very likely. and why I think that can be, again, just an important part of our self-growth journey. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you have a peaceful rest of your day. If you are like me and you are interested in internal family systems and you have a question that you'd like to hear me unpack, please send it to me. There is a link to my website down in the video notes.